That's all right. Yeah, it happens. But fix this up a little bit. There we go. Move you to the center since you're the center of attention.
Perfect.
We went live. You didn't even tell me.
Of course, I never tell you when we go live.
It's good. Candid openings.
Yeah, I always like those, and plus, I want to get you saying something like really shitty.
1 minute before we go live, I kind of cut that part of my brain off anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not going to happen. Sorry. I will say something fun, though. My dad came in town this weekend. He organized a little Masters pool. I don't watch a lot of golf anymore. I used to run them myself. I never won one ever. He ran this one, and I won it. Cashed in. I don't even know the guys I was picking half the time. But we watched the Masters this weekend, and it was fun tournament to watch with him.
Regular golf or disc golf?
That was regular golf. I watch a lot of disc golf. There was also a disc golf tournament this weekend. It was taking place in Arkansas at a famous course there, kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And the only like professional disc golfer that I actually have a relationship with, where I can like reach out to him and have a conversation. He finished second. He was third last week and second this week. He's been playing really well. So it's fun to kind of cheer him on too.
That's good. We just started the disc golf season over here in Norway this week. The snow is almost gone, and some of the courses are starting to open.
Yes, and Simen Aaslund? Oslund. There's so many in Scandinavia. There are so many vowels that are just a little different. Like actually, the guy who got second place at the Masters this year is from Sweden, and his name is spelled A, but it has that little O above the A, B-E-R-G. So everyone here is saying Aberg, but it's actually Oberg.
So it's like almost like Austin, Texas. Oslund is my name.
There you go. And Simen is one of the coaches with Kriger Training. I see on his shirt there. You guys, if you're not really like plugged in, you probably don't see him too often, especially in North America. Joachim Rieg is his kind of partner in crime. They kind of team up and lead the Kriger camp, which we're gonna talk about the expanses and how far-reaching that kind of is or isn't. And Joachim recently took a trip down to Florida, to Miami, to visit with Lena and Matilda, Enrique, and the Kriger Peak 360 collaborative team down there. And I would guess, even that left you kind of at the helm for a lot of other teams that were gearing up for a pretty intense quarterfinal weekend last week.
We had 8 teams at CrossFit Oslo doing the quarterfinals. So that's a big group, and then we also had some teams that were not in Oslo, like the Peak team in Miami. We have some few teams in Sweden and Denmark that we're working with as well. So that was a busy weekend, but it went well.
It definitely went well, and it was certainly a busy weekend. I mean, Patrick and we talk to you guys every once in a while, and the number of teams that you guys are going to roll out there every year and the different levels of expectation for them varies. But it's a very, and we're going to get to Kriger and they're kind of, like I said, they're expansive teams this season specifically, but you guys have a big kind of production going on. I had a chance to come there and train with you guys actually during a really kind of slow time of the year, but just so, most people understand, my understanding is that on a normal training day, you guys are hosting 24 plus, sometimes 36 plus competitors, people who are actually training to compete either individually or team in this sport multiple times a day. And a lot of them are training there at CrossFit Oslo.
Yeah, that's true. Almost everybody in Norway who really wants to put some time and effort into their CrossFit, they move to Oslo, and especially to the area around CrossFit Oslo to be a part of that and train with this group. So usually somewhere between 10 and 25 people every day. So it's a good group.
Yeah. And, how that seems like it's been going on for 3 to 4 years now. I mean, maybe the number has grown, but that kind of serious training environment definitely picked up on the international stage when we saw Oslo Navy Blue kind of make their breakthrough 4 seasons ago now. Is that about the time that you guys really started ramping that up locally, or has it kind of been building towards that for a few years prior?
Yeah, it has been like 3 or 4 years where it's become gradually more and more competitive athletes over here. We have, of course, Kristin Holte since 2013 almost, but she was not alone, but she was like the only games level athlete for a while. And then as she was approaching the end of her career, we had the CrossFit Oslo team, and that's probably when it like really exploded. And people saw that if they wanted to be competitive for Norway, it's probably a good idea to stay close to CrossFit Oslo.
And how much did that that time period intersect with kind of the recognition of functional fitness as a sport in Norway?
It's about the same time, yeah. But I'm not sure like how much of an effect that had. It has, of course, been good, but being a part of the national federation, we get some support, but the extent and the amount of money that's in there is still very, very low. And I think we would probably have like the same community even if we didn't have functional fitness in Norway. So it might have been a small part of it, but I think like the main part is Kristin and the success of the Kriger CrossFit Oslo team that started 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I mean that's pretty cool. There, obviously, at the CrossFit Games, still to this day, we have the opening ceremonies where the countries get to march out, and there's this massive contingency of athletes from the United States, and then there's a few countries that have like an actual feels like a team of athletes from there, and Norway has become one of those primarily because of the team participation last year. Not only just the Oslo teams, but also Trondheim sent a team there, and so there's a lot of competitors in the team side of things, specifically in Norway, which is one of the reasons why we invited Simen onto the show today, because the last 3 weeks we had been kind of building towards what is coming this week, which is individual quarterfinals, and kind of setting the stage for how demanding of a point of the season this is going to be for the individuals. And if you are interested in the individual quarterfinal stage, we did who do we do, Patrick? We did the North American East women, and then we did the North American West men and European men. As just an example of we were calling them the depth of field series, to kind of see how many good athletes are in those different parts of the world. We could have chosen the opposite, the men in the East, the women in the West, the women in Europe. They're just as deep. But all of these regions have seen a narrowing of the qualifiers from quarterfinals to semifinals.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pressure on the quarterfinals that are coming up this week for the individuals. But on the team side of things, it's a lot messier out of the open previewing quarterfinals, and things look a lot cleaner following quarterfinals prior to semifinals. Now we have every declared team narrowed down to a maximum of 6 athletes, and we have a really good idea. Actually, today the review process should finalize, so should know exactly the teams that will at least be invited to the semifinal. Starting about a month from now. And similarly to the individual side, but maybe less talked about, there has been a reduction of team spots this year to the CrossFit Games. And therefore, I think that these semifinals on the team side of things are about to get really intense, especially in Europe, where there are potentially 2.5 times as many games quality teams as there are spots available. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So I've just kind of set the stage there, but Simen, would you want to echo or follow up on any of that?
Yeah, I agree. It's the quarterfinals and semifinals in Europe on the team side. The semifinals going to be challenging. And also we saw from the quarterfinals last year, we had 40 spots from the quarterfinals to the semi. This year it's only 30. And in addition to that, because they switched the order, so now the teams go first with the quarterfinals and then individuals go after. I think some teams last year relied on having individual athletes help them in the team quarterfinals. And this year that's a lot more challenging because the individuals are still preparing for their individual quarterfinal. So
yeah, that's a nuance I hadn't even really considered, but you obviously being in the fray there, like, you can list, right? Last year you could list Matilda Garnis as an alternate for one of the teams. And if she's already punched her ticket to semi, and someone's not feeling great, she could
Yeah.
compete on those quarterfinal tests and help get them to the next stage.
Yeah, she was actually just for fun, for her sake, probably on a roster from the Open last year. And then one of the girls on that team injured her ankle, and then Matilda kindly stepped in and helped them in the quarterfinals.
Oh, exactly the scenario that I was saying could happen, did happen. But a lot more unlikely this year, as Simen said, and maybe riskier because individuals haven't had quarterfinals yet. And as we know in this sport, there's no second chances, really. I mean, if you don't do well enough at quarterfinals, it doesn't matter what you did the year before or any other time in your career. Same thing at semifinals. It's show up, perform, and qualify. Otherwise, your season ends.
Yeah, and I also think now that the individual semifinal is only 40 spots, you really have to be high up in the European semifinals or like top 10 potential to feel safe at quarterfinals. Most people that are outside of the top 10 in Europe still have like some small holes. And then if you have just 4 workouts like the teams had, then if one of those workouts really hits your weak spot, then you might be in trouble, even though you might be a really good athlete.
We've talked about it a lot throughout the history of the sport, that there are certain athletes that will do better at the games than semifinals, others that will do better at semifinals and quarterfinals, etc. But right now, the way that this season is structured, you can't afford to be one of those guys or girls. Like, you need to be good at every stage. And so you think about someone like, Jeff Adler's a great example. If you just look at his career, he always has good, maybe not winning. I mean, sometimes he wins, but he always places highly at every stage of the season, online, qualifiers for the games. If you're not that person, though, I mean, Jeff Adler, quite frankly, has, a pretty good genetic makeup. He's like 5'9", 195, and he's, got 10 years of training experience in this sport and all this other stuff that really lends itself well to being pretty balanced. But not every athlete in this sport is balanced. And so we're going to see a lot of, I mean, people have been, I said it a couple months ago, this quarterfinal stage that we're going to see this week revealed is going to be one of the most critical programming pieces I've ever seen. Adrian Bosman's been teasing that it's going to be fun and challenging, and I'm sure it will be. But looking backwards, quarterfinals for teams is pretty much in the rearview mirror. Like I said, today's the last day for potentially any changes based on review that the CrossFit Games team is doing. And here's what the landscape looks like. Last year, in the middle there, you see that these are spots qualifying to the games, 10, 10, 10 for the big 3 regions, 3, 2, 2, 1. And we've dropped 8 teams out of the mix. So the games field in Fort Worth this year will be reduced to 30. Europe and North America East lose 2. North America West loses 3. Asia loses 1. That's kind of how the breakdown goes of where we got those 8 spots removed from. And therefore, in Europe, which is the focus of today's show, there are 8 available spots to the CrossFit Games. And when I looked at the quarterfinals, I saw just kind of, and obviously there are things that are happening during quarterfinals that maybe people outside of the intimacy of those camps or teams don't know about in terms of the level of effort. Maybe some of these teams are redoing every workout twice to try to get the best possible score. Maybe others of them are doing them Thursday, Friday, and moving on with it and not worried at all, and everything in between. But when I looked at the leaderboard, I saw 4 teams towards the top that I would consider to be 4 pretty good teams that I kind of thought are, to ask you the question, Simen, when you look at these 4 teams, there's 2 that have a Swedish flag, 2 that have a Spanish flag. However, that C23 CrossFit in 4th place actually has no Spanish athletes on their team. It's 3 Swedes. So you got a really high population of Swedish athletes in the top 4 there. Do you look at these 4? I mean, you know these 4 teams fairly well. And do you think, these are 4 teams that I need to, if I'm a team competing at semis, I need to be on this level if I want to kind of feel even semi-comfortable about making it to the games?
Yeah, I think this year there are no like clear winners in the European semi for teams. I think last year we could probably say in advance that it was going to be like no shortcut, and Navy Blue were going to be in the top. But I think this year it's not like, I am of course biased with the Norwegian teams. I think the Oslo Kreiger PSL team in the 6th place, and then CrossFit Oslo Kriger who placed 8th. will be a little bit higher when we get to semis. But those 2 Swedish teams and the 2 Spanish teams are definitely going to be a big challenge to compete with in the semifinals. But again, I think it's really, really open. And with the programming that we saw at quarterfinals this year, I think the leaderboard might shift a bit for the semifinals, because we didn't have any like high skill. We didn't see handstand walk. We didn't have any rope climbs. So the quarterfinal programming was more similar to open. And if semis is anything like last year, we might see some changes on the leaderboard, I think.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a high likelihood and probability of seeing elements of programming in the semifinal that have a big capacity to jostle things on the leaderboard. But these were the top 4 teams coming in. Prestranda Kriger has, they have the name Kreiger there in the title, and Prestranda was competing last year at the games. They actually took 10th place at the games last year. I think all 4 of these athletes were on the roster, but Lisa was an alternate for them last year, and Hannah Carlson was competing. How well do you know this team, and how did it end up, this kind of merge between Prestranda and Kriger?
They were also being affiliated with Kriger last year, so I was actually fortunate to be able to help them a little bit at the games last year. And they're just really experienced, and especially the three from last year, Maria, Alexander, and Victor, have a lot of experience at a high level in Europe. And then Lisa is kind of the new one, who's pretty new to CrossFit, but she's very talented. And her progress over the last year has made this team probably stronger than it was last year. So I would be pretty safe to say that they have a good chance of qualifying this year, and I also think they might place higher than they did at the games last year.
Damn, that's pretty cool. And obviously having three parts of a team of 4 coming back is strong. The fact that Lisa was an alternate on their team last year, it's almost like sometimes on the individual side we see athletes that they'll compete on a team, and a year or 2 later they'll make it through as an individual. But I think even within the team side, sometimes you get athletes that they're an alternate on a team. They get that exposure, that training alongside with, and then when the opportunity comes and they have a chance to step in and fill those spots, it seems like those athletes usually do pretty well.
Yeah, they do. And also with this team last year, as I mentioned, I was fortunate to be with them a little bit during the games. And it just seemed like they had a lot of fun. They communicated really well. And they were just like a big group of friends who really enjoyed spending time together. And I think that's going to also help them be more successful this year. I think they had a good year of training, and I think they just function really well together.
So we got one team here that's more or less coming back. They were all on the roster last year. 3 of them were at the games, had a top 10 finish. This is a strong team. This is a team that I would say if they didn't finish in the top 8 at the Europe semi, that would be surprising. The other team in this top 4 that's bearing the Swedish flag, I think most people will recognize these athletes a lot more. We have Christoph Horvath, Elliot, and Jamie Simmons and Mia Hesketh, but a pretty new team and comprised of individuals that's, not a lot of people are really, at least in North America, are talking to them. Is there more, kind of conversation about this team over there in Europe?
I think so. And especially with the names like Elliot Simmons and Jamie Simmons has been at the games. Christoph has been a really top-level athlete in Europe over the last few years, and he also has experience on team. And then Mia, coming back from having a child, has reached a really high level again. So I think this team is also going to be strong, and I will also be very surprised if this team doesn't qualify from the European semis.
Yeah, this has the feeling of a team to me that will probably get better at every stage of the season, just as they spend more time together, as the skills get more difficult. And I mean, I would say that, on paper, the credentials of Christoph Horvath don't match up with the other 3 on this team. But he's, like you said, he's been competing for a long time. He has a lot of team experience. And Patrick and I have actually, when this team was announced, we kind of thought, man, it's, I think that if Christoph had chosen to try on a team earlier, he could have potentially contributed to some pretty strong teams.
Yeah, I think he has been training with some teams, or have been talking about doing team together. I have been coaching Matilde Garnes for a while for previous seasons, and I know she was on a team with Christoph in some competition. I think they went to Dubai together a few years ago. So he has some team experience. And also when we're talking about like the difference in programming from open to quarterfinals to semi and games, Christoph is one of those athletes like Jelle Hoste who would be really fun to see at the games, because he has some like special qualities that don't really help him much in the open and quarterfinals. But once he gets on an echo bike and then a heavy sandbag or something like that, I think
in Dubai,
on the team.
He tried to break that workout in Dubai with the C2 bike, the burpee box, and the sandbags.
Yeah,
and yeah, I mean, he's obviously a physically imposing specimen. We've seen him hit big ones in Madrid in team competitions, send it in sprint power output workouts in individual and team competitions over the last several years. The first time I saw Christoph really compete and kind of surprised me with the level was strength and depth. I think it was the first year of strength and depth during sanctionals. And I've always since then thought, man, if this guy could just get into a semifinal, I don't know that he'd make the games, but he would stir things up in a way that he's probably never going to do online.
Yeah, he would probably like have some event wins once he gets those like movements that he's really good at. Like the first event at the semifinals last year with the sled pull, assault runner, stuff like that would be probably very, very good for him. I think, I'm not sure if Jelle Hoste won that workout. I think he did in Europe, but I think Christoph would give him probably a fight.
Yeah, Brian's introduction to Christoph is very similar to mine. I first saw him at the Asia CrossFit Championships in 2019, and he finished second, I believe, to Fikowski. And back then, he was a mayhem athlete. And then I know that's how long. I mean, he was being coached by Facundo at the time, and he was a mayhem athlete, and obviously mayhem was there. And I was like, "Who is this guy?" He looked like a character from like Street Fighter.
Yeah,
movie or something like that. He looked like a final boss type of video game, but he was just the nicest guy. And just to see him, like Brian said, we've always said, like, this is why he isn't on some of these teams. We would see him on teams in the off season, but I think a lot of that was he put his career. I mean, he would put his career on hold for Gabby because he was a coach down at for the program, and I think most of his efforts were coaching Gabby and coaching other athletes when he was at the program. So it's cool to kind of see him kind of like now reinvesting himself, especially with a team like this. And I think what a better team. They obviously get along very well. I think, was this the same team that competed at Madrid?
Yeah, I think so. All four athletes.
Yeah, I think all four athletes competed. And I think it started last year at Madrid when it was supposed to be Alex Smith and Danny Spiegel on a team, and they decided not to compete. And I think that's when they were kind of like backfills on that team. And I think that's when they got to know each other and they've maintained that friendship. And they're really close. I know, like, they're really close in terms of they have a good relationship with Gabby, Laura, and it's just really cool. And I really do see big things for this team. It obviously has the strength numbers, the names, the games athletes, but but as Simen has seen, sometimes you don't need the names to have a podium team. And I think Oslo defines that more than anyone.
Yeah, I think the challenge for this team is they have very different qualities, and they are somewhat like specialists at different things. Christoph and Mia is really, really good at lifting, and then Elliot and Jamie is more like bodyweight specialists. And what we have seen from the games previous years is there's a lot of forcing. So once there's running, everybody has to run. When there's handstand push-up, everybody has to do handstand push-up. And then it doesn't really help if you have one or two athletes that are exceptional at handstand push-up, because they still have to wait for like the weakest athlete.
Correct.
And I think that comes kind of down to programming. You could get lucky, and you could also be punished for that. But I think that's one of the things, or the challenge that this team will face, that they need to make sure that the weakest links try to improve their weaknesses, so that strengths and weaknesses align a little bit better. And I also think that's one of the reasons why we see some teams with great names don't really work very well, and then some other teams who don't have like the top level athletes could work very well together because they have similar strengths and weaknesses.
I'm going to remember you say that, because at the end of this, there's been a lot of people asking. I want to kind of give your idea, inside information per se on Peak 360. So we're going to put a pin in that because, you just said that, in terms of all these name athletes. I mean, there's not a bigger team out there with big name athletes. So I really want to ask you what makes them different from some of these other teams. So we'll talk about that later.
Save it.
We'll save that, Patrick. You're responsible for remembering that. So exactly. We're gonna scoot down to the third team here. They have a Spanish flag on the leaderboard. As I mentioned, 3 of the 4 athletes coming from Sweden. Axel Lundgren and Harrison Bell are the men. Antonia Falk-Kodolinski and Ella Wunger are the women. Simen, you're going to know these athletes really well just from being in Scandinavia and team competitions over the last couple of years, because they actually have this is one of those teams that doesn't have maybe the names, but they do have some good experience.
Yeah, they do have some good team experience, and they also have athletes who have competed for a long time. Ella made the games individually for the first time last year, so she obviously is a really high-level athlete. I talked with Axel today, actually, and he is feeling good, and I think he's feeling confident with the team. And he said they feel like they're a very well-rounded team who doesn't really have any big weaknesses. They can lift, they can run, they can do almost everything at a pretty high level. So it's going to be exciting to see. I'm a bit surprised Ella going team after making the games last year. I don't know why that's the case, but I also understand this team is a team that could have podium potential, and fighting for a podium spot as a team might be a nice challenge. Instead of trying to fight for maybe top 10 or 15 or 20 would be something that's realistic for her individually.
Yeah, and I'm always reminded of this line that Sean Woodland throws out there at the start of some team competitions he broadcasts: fitness is more fun with friends.
Yeah, true.
I think he especially says it at the Wadapalooza the past couple years, because they have the individuals and then the teams, and it's just a beautiful segue. But the guy that I'm really curious about here, I've never really seen Harrison Bell compete too much, but he did the quarterfinals in Europe the last 2 years, and I have more or less been saying that the depth of talent, I'm not saying that they have the best, that the top 3 guys in Europe are as good as the top 3 guys in North America, because they're not. They haven't been. But 20 through 100, I think you could stack up those 80 men in Europe against the 20 through 100 in North America East or West, or maybe just in North America in general. But we've been getting twice as many spots in North America. Still, Harrison would have made it in a he was close to making the semis, is what I'm trying to say. He finished 74th and 77th in the individual quarterfinals last year, which is 10 spots or so backfill out from making it to those semis. This kid's pretty good. He just hasn't really given it much of a run individually.
No, he's one of those athletes that I don't really know very well. Have seen him at some competitions, but I couldn't say his strengths and weaknesses. But I see he has been competing since 2017.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be pretty good. He just hasn't really put his name. He hasn't gone to Madrid and competed individually, or qualified or been invited to a stage like Dubai. So if he's done local competitions individually, I'm not aware of him. But on the team side of things, he does have some experience, and he's individually appears to be pretty good. So I'm excited to watch him this year. I hope that we get to see maybe 1 or 2 kind of opportunities for the athletes to individually show their stuff at the semifinal, and we'll see if he does anything notable there.
Yeah.
And that amongst those top 4 teams, that leaves the Zarautz TrainingCult team. They have had teams that have been threatening or making the games for the past couple of years. This is a pretty experienced team, actually. Javier and Maribel I think we're competing on a team together, or maybe it's Jasmine. One of the girls and Javier competed on, it's in the article. They competed on a team together at 2017 regionals. Pablo Cazales has captained a team to the CrossFit Games before out of Spain, and Maribel was on that team, I believe. So a lot of experience here. Javier sometimes competes individual on the off season. We've seen him take top 10 in Dubai 2 years ago. But this is a team that what I know about them as athletes, I don't think they have a superstar, but they are all pretty comparable to each other. And like Simen was saying, in a good, in a kind of a slate of programming that really rewards that, this team I think can do pretty well.
Yeah, and yeah, we're going to talk about that with the peak team later, but I think that's a smart way to think about putting teams together, like matching strengths and weaknesses. So if you have that on a team, you might do really well. I don't know these athletes too well, but they have always performed very well at like open and quarterfinals. And then I feel like we still have yet to see them perform at the top level at the semifinals or qualify for the games, as far as I know.
And that more or less has been the story in Spain over the last couple of years on the individual side. And then you started to have some breakthroughs. Finally, Elena Caratala broke through. Fabian Benito finally broke through and made the games last year. A lot of people think Anyola Kai has the chance to be that breakthrough this year. Thanks, Jessica. And now in Spain, what we're seeing is that a lot of teams are starting to really have some success at these online qualifying stages. If you count the Swedish Spanish team, Spanish because they're on the flag there, there's 7 Spanish flags in the top 30 going to Lyon this year. We can go to the article and look at the other ones. I probably know these teams a little bit better than you, Simen. I think the team that's in 13th with I guess they're called 7 Feet Orange is the only other team that probably has any fighting chance at the semifinal level. There are some, like Sara Fernandez Costas on the max effort team, has a lot of experience. And Ana Alcazar is a pretty good athlete on Santa Maria Grit Black. But if I was looking at teams that could threaten for the top 8, and I was a fan of Spanish CrossFit, besides the Zarautz team, I think that 7 Feet Orange is probably the next best chance that they have. I don't know if you have any thoughts about these teams or just the volume of teams that they're sending through this year.
I don't know them too well. My impression is that, again, we see the Spanish athletes, and me and Joachim have been discussing this a bit, like training style. We don't know too much about their training, but we see, like, in general, we see Spanish athletes and team performing really well in some types of workouts. And then maybe like Scandinavian athletes performing better in some other types of workouts. And like the impression so far is that a lot of the Spanish athletes are really good at barbell cycling, high volume gymnastics, shorter, more powerful workouts, while Scandinavian athletes in general are maybe better at endurance. They might be like bigger or taller or heavier athletes in general. So again, it's going to be exciting to see with the programming what we'll get at semifinals. Last year, I felt like it was like the best competition we've ever seen for a tall athlete. And I'm a tall person doing CrossFit myself, so I was happy to see that. But yeah, we'll see if the Spanish athletes prefer that as well.
Yeah, or if the pendulum swings in the other direction with, when it comes to the programming, sometimes you get a little bias one year, it swings back the next year. It's one of the reasons why I wish good morning, Roger, or good evening. It's one of the reasons that I wish we had some data, like actual data on the height and the weight of athletes at the games year over year to see if, in 2018, 19, 20, it was trending a little bit lighter. And then by 21, 22, 23, trending a little taller or, something like that. But we're at the mercy of the athletes reporting that stuff. So we don't know for sure. We just have some kind of speculations.
But I think Mike Halpin did some from last year compared to 22.
Yeah, we've done the comparisons based on the data that's on the CrossFit Games site. Yeah. So I've been doing this for a long time, but I always use this example. Tia Claire Toomey, every single year from 2015 to 2023 has been listed at 137 pounds. I'm pretty confident that she's weighed different weights in those different years. Height is probably more reliable. So when people want to do studies about height in CrossFit, but even so, we had Matt Fraser on a couple of weeks ago. I told him he competed his whole career at 5'7". He's like, I'm not 5'7".
Okay.
I know there's some athletes that have been teenagers that are on the taller side. They'll list themselves at 6'1", but by the time they're 22 and they're 6'3", they haven't changed it and they don't want to change it. And this happens in a lot of sports. But I think about CrossFit, and it's somewhat in ways that I do of MMA fighter, boxing or something like that. Like it's not the NBA where you're playing like 80 games over the course of a year and whatever. We know all the guys are tall.
Yeah.
No, it's like athletes. It's cool to say, hey, a third of the field this year on the men's side is 6 feet or taller. Like that's a cool stat to say. Wow. And then you could have those conversations about the programming anyway. So in general, I would say yes. The Scandinavian athletes are going to be taller and better on endurance, just as a blanket statement. But clearly there's a good momentum in Spain in terms of competitive athlete. There's competitions there all the time. I got a chance to cover 2 this past off season, and on the team side of things, they're really sending a big contingency to semis. So maybe a couple surprises, but if you were going to bet on 2, I would go for Zarautz and the 77 feet orange as the best chances out of Spain this year.
Yeah, agree.
You said something a minute or 2 ago about kind of this advice that you would give to people if they were building teams of how to select teams. And the next section here is we've pulled out the Kriger teams. So this year, besides the ones that you guys have affiliation with outside of there are 4 that have qualified to the semifinal. You mentioned the ones that are on 6th and 8th, and then there's also these 2 in 20 and 24. First thing is, what goes into the process of distributing athletes across these many teams that you have? You said 8 competed, 4 qualified.
Yeah. What we did is with actually all the Kreiger teams, also those who is not in Norway, the Swedish ones and the Danish ones, we reached out to all the athletes that we think want to compete, and then we ask them to apply for teams. So if you want to compete at a team, you send us your height, your goals, your weight, we have this thing called athlete profile, where everybody at the Kriger team will do an athlete profile, and it gives us a very clear impression of strengths and weaknesses of all the athletes. And then once we have that, we sit down, me and Joachim, and start to distribute athletes the way that we think is the best. And then we tell the teams, and then we cross our fingers and hope that everybody say yes. That never happens. But yeah, at some point they agree or they talk to each other, and some changes are made. But we start off by recommending that we think you should go on a team together. And that's mainly focused on, of course, level. We're trying to put the best athletes together, but also strengths and weaknesses. So if we have a couple of athletes that aren't really good at handstand push-ups, we would try to pair them with other athletes that aren't good at handstand push-ups. And then once handstand push-up shows up, we'll just accept a low placement. And this team that you're looking at now, I don't know if it's that deliberate, but this is maybe
run
about.
This is a running team.
They're not going to win handstand push-up events.
No.
But if these guys get on an erg or on running, they might beat all the teams at the games. From the level that we've seen at the games on the teams competition for the last few years, these athletes are good enough to beat everything that we've seen previously on the ergs and on running.
And we're gonna look at each of the teams in a little bit of detail here for the Kriger. But if you're an athlete that's interested in being a part of the Kriger program or Kriger team, or would want to apply for that next year, is that could anyone submit that application, or is there something that you need to do ahead of time?
No, definitely. Just reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook or Joachim, and then we'll get you started with collecting all the information that we need to find a team that's suited for you.
Very cool. So I went through all the athletes, 16 athletes that I believe competed during the quarterfinals on these teams, and I put down in the article here the team that they're on now, and then where they were last year, because almost all the athletes, almost all these 16 athletes did something notable last season, or were at the games or the semis, or on a team, some of them together, some of them different, and then have been distributed. And I know that in general, in the team competitions, the individual athletes on the teams don't always get the recognition. It's very difficult to identify 40 different individuals on a field instead of 10 teams. And then you have heats and heats of that and changing year to year. But PC, if you scroll down a little bit here, we can start with the PSL team. These guys are fairly experienced. and 2 of them were on the blackout team last year, and the girls, I believe. And that team, I don't think that the blackout team got a lot of recognition last year because there was still so much focus on navy blue, but that was a pretty good team, and especially I think the girls.
That was a team that you, Simen, you coached the blackout team last year, correct?
I was with them on the pre-camp, and then more like a collaboration with me and Joachim in the leading into the games. So yeah, the girls are really good. The guys on the team are really good as well. But that's one of the teams last year where we really felt like we matched the wrong athletes, or the qualities of the guys are completely different from the qualities of the girls.
Yes.
The girls are 2 of the best athletes in the world in squats and handstand push-up and lifting. And both the guys are very endurance-based and doesn't really like that much squatting and pressing. So, and they were punished for that last year. So on the running events, the guys weren't really able to show how good they are at running. And on some of the other events with more like barbell cycling, squatting, max lifts, the girls weren't really able to show how good they could be.
And so Andreas Andreas and Leon, and I just realized I had forgotten a character on one of their placements I had on there. But Andreas and Leon this year, to add to that team, was that like something that you had always kind of been targeting to get those guys with these girls, or did it kind of back into it?
It kind of just happened when we talked to the athletes after the season last year, and we agreed with the girls that we needed to find a few guys to match their qualities better. And now the girls are really good at lifting, and so are the guys. So this is a team that's going to do really well if we see a max lift, any of the Olympic lifts, but they would probably prefer like a 1RM squat clean. This is a team that could win those events, both at semifinals and at the games.
If there was an event for the nicest and sweetest women, this team would win too. Just saying, hands down.
Actually, with the guys also.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so the sweetest team probably.
Yeah, definitely.
And quite frankly, though, the second team here, that Riz team that you were talking about just previously, they only finished 2 spots behind them in the semis, is 10 points on the leaderboard, which it's kind of here or there in a quarterfinal format. They've got a couple of experienced female athletes as well.
Yeah.
Nicole, she competed individually last year. She was 36 at the semis, and Varthurman Mo, she was on that Trondheim team that I referenced earlier, who also made the games and finished 12th there. And always when people talk about the team competitions, they say, I mean, you want to be good in teams, you got to have strong women. And these are now 2 teams in a row that have a really strong partnership of women on their teams.
Yeah, and with like now we have actually matched their qualities. So both of these girls good at running, but maybe like extremely good on ergs. I've seen Vår beating guys, good guys on the echo bike on the same number of calories. She can hold like above 70 RPM for a long time. She's extremely good on a bike. And so is Nicole. So we're just really hoping to see some pure erg events at the semifinals for the games.
And then in this case, again, we have 2 of the teammates that were on the same team last year. So it was Tobias, one of the males, and Vår, who came over from Trondheim to be a part of the Kriger camp this year. Did they reach out to you? How did that kind of transition happen?
A little bit of combination of both. I think some of them reached out to us. Morten was on a team last year as well. He knew he wanted to go on a team this year. And then we just needed to find athletes that would match the qualities. And with this team, actually, Nicole is still staying in Switzerland. Morten is staying in Oslo, but Vår is in Trondheim, and Tobias is in northern Norway. So they have been flying in for training camps and, of course, doing the open and quarterfinals at CrossFit Oslo. So the challenge for this team is going to be to be able to get enough team training in.
Northern Norway, that's a big area.
Yeah. Larvik. that's not going to tell you much. It's everything on them is northern Norway.
Yeah,
I also believe the two holdovers from Trondheim, they were on the team that won the 5K, correct?
Yes, so they were on the running team from last year. They won. I think they won multiple of the running events at the games last year.
Yeah,
and they won 5K pretty easily.
Yeah, pretty easily.
Did they?
really.
Was it also that one that had I think it was like 3 loops plus the 4-person sled pull? That they think they did well on that.
I think they were second, if I'm guessing correctly, first or second. Again, they're just really good at running, and so are the guys. So this is kind of a similar team to the Trondheim team from last year, but
this is more well balanced.
Yeah, it's a little bit more well balanced, and they're gonna do okay in lifting events as well. But I think this is one of the things that we see with the CrossFit Trondheim team from last year. They had some extremely big holes, especially in lifting events, but they were able to almost win every endurance event possible. So they qualified for the games. They did really well at the games because they had those really high placements. And I think to be a top 5 team or a top 10 team at the games, that's a good thing. If you want to be on the podium, you need to be good at everything.
Absolutely. And so I think it's fair to say that these are the top 2 teams for Kriger this year, that at least within Norway. And at this point in the season, do you kind of look at these teams with a certain level of expectation, or how do you kind of rationalize that with yourself versus kind of communicate that with them?
We have been talking about goals with both of these teams, and it's a very clear goal, of course, to make it to the games. But the girls on the PSL team were 12th last year. They want to improve on that. And also the 2 athletes from the old CrossFit Trondheim team, I think they were 11th at the games last year. So I think it's pretty easy to guess what the goal is for this season for both of them.
Yeah. So, obviously you can't get to the games without the semi, but you look at these 2 teams and think that their chances to make it to the games are more or less going to come down to just taking care of business at semifinals.
Yeah, you have to do the job, but I think both of them really didn't perform as well as they should at the quarterfinals, but they were still pretty high up on the leaderboard. There were some small injuries. We were thinking about making some changes with the alternates, but then we ended up going with the full teams for both of them. We had to make some small adjustments, especially to the deadlift shoulder to overhead workout. Vår on one of the teams had a knee surgery and it's just been coming back. She's going to be fine for semis, but quarterfinals was pretty early in her rehab, but then we didn't have any jumping or running or stuff like that. So she decided to go ahead, but I think they're going to be even higher on the leaderboard in the semifinals.
And then the other 2 teams, they're listed as BLST and
Blast.
And
they don't like nouns or not nouns, but they just don't believe in vowels. Sorry. They don't believe in vowels in Oslo, I guess.
No. This is also a good team. It's
veteran team. Yep.
Yeah, they have Ragnhild to the left in this picture has been in the games on the team the 2 last seasons. She's of course a really good athlete. Oda is young and up and coming, and they have very similar strengths. They're both very strong, very good on endurance, and that goes for the guys as well. So this team is kind of similar to the wrist team. They're hoping for endurance events and a lot of running.
Yeah, Ragnhild was on that same team as Morten Rasch Arnesen last year. The nice team that ended up 27th at the games after taking 9th at semis, which was a nice semifinal performance. So some experience there. And Olda, as you said, she competed on the Pink Panthers Oslo team last year. That was 33rd. The guys there were a little less experienced than the women, I would say.
Yeah, they're a little bit newer to the sport. Benjamin is a former soccer player, great endurance. And Andreas is a young athlete coming from southern Norway, and he's also really, really good at endurance. So for this team, the BLST team, I think if they get the right workouts at semifinals, they might have a chance. But if they get the wrong workouts, they're going to struggle with being close to qualifying for the games.
And then that leaves the Kriger team, which was 24th amongst the 30 qualifiers last time that I looked.
Yep.
Some experience. Henrik and Sin were on the same team last year, RBLS, that took 13th at semis. And Alexander was actually on the team with Benjamin that you just mentioned. They just missed out on the semis last year.
Yeah, true. So they have some team experience. And again, we have tried to match athletes that would fit well together. So this is also a team that's going to have to hope for the right workouts in semifinals to have a chance. If they do, it might be possible. But it's not possible, probably, that the Kriger team qualifies and also the BLST team, because they have very different qualities. So if the semifinal programming will suit the BLST team well, it's not going to suit Kriger. And the other way around.
Hedging your bets there.
Yeah.
It's not a bad strategy. I mean, 8 teams is not, I think if you haven't gotten the idea yet, we've only looked at really Spain, Sweden, and Norway so far. There's plenty of other teams that are going to be at that semifinal that are very good, but very cool to kind of get this in-depth look at the Kriger teams. It's pretty easy to say, Kriger has 4 teams here, but obviously these are 4 teams comprised of 4 individuals, and of these 16 individuals, a lot of experience, quality, and certainly potential. So thank you for kind of walking us through that so we can get a feel for it. If you're going to keep track of everything, it's on the article there. I went through and listed out their accomplishments from last year and the teams that they're on this year. But that leads us into 3 other countries that qualified 3 teams to the semifinal. The first of which is Denmark. Denmark, is pretty much Butcher's Lab and Denmark are pretty much just the same thing at this point in terms of team representation at high level competitions. And that top team there, I'm sure you're familiar with them. Like that's a really strong team.
Yeah, they are really good, and I think they deserve that spot as being the best Danish team. And I also think that's the team that's going to do the best at semifinals, and they have a fair shot at making it to the games.
I would say absolutely. Victor Munter has been kind of the stalwart of that team for a long time. He knows how to manage competitions really well. Felix Rader is one of the fittest guys in Germany. He could qualify at the individual semis probably in any given year. Astrid has been competing. Mia has been competing. That's a strong team. If I was going to pick 8 teams to make it right now, I would put this amongst those 8 teams.
They're in my top 8 as well.
And that leaves the other 2 who had they had good performances. 11th and 16th. Obviously, the quarterfinals is not the telltale sign for everything, but I think a good mix on these teams of some experienced athletes and some younger athletes, which to me leaves a little bit of wait and see. I don't know if either of the teams can make the top 8, but I definitely don't want to count them out.
No, I know the Butcher's Lab X team the best out of these 3. Mm-hmm. They have been in contact with Kriger a little bit, and they're a really good team, but they have different qualities. So again, programming might affect their performance a little bit if we see that there's a lot of force sync work. But if they're able to use their individual strengths, I think this team could also be close to the top 8 in the European semis.
PC, were you going to weigh something?
Yeah, I was going to ask him like what his relationship with the Butcher's Lab is, because I know that Kriger was involved with them, and they do have, especially the women, Martine and Agerbeck. They're both they've been around for a while.
Yeah, they're all following the Kriger program, but they are competing out of Denmark, and they have another Danish coach who's not affiliated with Kriger. So we're just helping out a little bit.
So once again, I would expect that that Denmark will have a pretty good contingency at semis. Again, with only 8 spots, I feel strongly about that top team. The other 2 are going to have to win me over at the semifinal on day 1 or 2, and see if they're in the fight on the final day. The UK is always an interesting kind of country in Europe to look at, because they have a lot. They do it. They compete there all the time, but it's mostly just within the UK. And they have a lot of big team competitions, and they have some well-established programs that have been around for a long time. I think especially JST is kind of as old as it gets out there. AOD has been around for a while. When I look at these teams, I have a lot more familiarity with the athletes on AOD and Jolly Sailor, and knowing those athletes, I wouldn't count either of them out from being in the mix on the final day at a semifinal. But what do you kind of know about these guys, Simen?
I only know the athletes on the AOD team as well, but I don't know their strengths and weaknesses too well. But that's also one of the teams that I would expect to see close to the qualifying spots.
They had a really interesting quarterfinals. Their progression of finishes jumped off the page of me. It was 32nd, 17th, 2nd.
Yeah, they were on the lifting event.
Yeah, so they smashed that moderately heavyweight barbell cycling AMRAP, but they had a pretty poor performance on the high volume ring muscle up workout.
Yeah.
So you can maybe see a little bit of a bias towards weightlifting relative to gymnastics. Granted, it's deadlifting and shoulder overhead. Maybe they're not good at snatching, and maybe they are good at handstand pushups. I mean, who knows? But there's definitely some experience there. The Will Kane is a very experienced on the Jolly Sailor team. So are the girls, Helen Collins and Janie Garrett. And then we actually spoke about Phil Roy Peters at one point during the Open, because he had a really good performance on 24.2. He's a young up-and-coming guy. Trains with the HWPO under Steve Fawcett, I think, but competing on a team this year, and just sneaks into a semifinal spot. I feel like that team is a little bit younger, has some maybe hunger and something to prove, whereas the other teams have a little bit more experience.
Do we know that are the rosters for all of them?
These are the athletes that the best of my knowledge, competed during the quarterfinals. I didn't list the alternates here for any of the teams, but in some cases they could potentially make a swap, especially if, let's say that, maybe Phil Roy does the individual quarterfinals and has the competition weekend of his life and makes it as an individual, then maybe they sub someone in. That is still a possibility.
I think the AOD team had Harvey Lightfoot as an alternate, and I think he did pretty well at the individual semifinals last year. So I would guess that he would be a good athlete to have on the team. I don't know OJ Keane very well.
I think OJ Keane was actually in Madrid last year, and I think he did really well in the running workout, but I could be wrong about that. But yeah, some of these teams certainly do have, athletes that you would consider to be individual semifinal quality listed as alternates, and with individuals quarterfinals still looming, and all of the premium for spots that's available there, and the reality that athletes who you'd expect to see at a semifinal year in and year out, a couple of them are not going to make it. That was the point of the last 3 weeks, is that for some athletes who are marking down semis as the make or break weekend, they're not even going to get there this year. Someone's heart's going to be broken during the quarterfinals, whether it's because a workout that's a movement, a penalty, a standard, a filming error, or just getting the wrong combination of workouts that doesn't suit your skill sets. It's going to happen. And if one of those people also happens to be on a team, then the team landscape could take a different shape.
Yeah.
The third country that got 3 teams in is Italy. When I look at these teams, I don't know them too well. I maybe know 1 or 2 athletes on each team, just kind of starting to get some familiarity with the athletes in Italy. The best rank they had during the quarterfinals was 14th. And, based on pretty much that alone, that's the team I would probably give the favoritism to here if I was going to pick one to have the best chance to make it. But knowing the depth and talent of most of the other teams in Europe, I think it's going to be difficult for Italy to qualify a team to the CrossFit Games this year.
Yeah, I think so tue. I don't know these athletes too well. I know Andrea Ferrero has been competing for some time and is a good athlete, but other than that, I'm not sure. And also I think, at least looking back to previous years, we haven't really seen that much of a change from quarterfinals to semifinals. out of the top 10 teams in the quarterfinals, I think there's usually just like one, two, or three teams that fights their way into the top 10 in the semifinals.
Yeah, and the teams that I think have the best chance to kind of fight their way in are teams that we haven't really hit on yet. There is actually one other team from Sweden. They weren't in the top 2 or 3 like those other teams, but they finished 10th. It's CrossFit Holistic. Marcus Eriksson is probably the most experienced athlete on this roster. Do you know these guys at all?
Yeah, I know some of them. I know Natalia Niska a bit. She's good on endurance stuff. I also think this is going to be a good team. I was looking more towards CrossFit Porti.
Oh, we're going to get to them in a second.
Okay, yeah, I'm ahead of time. But yeah, these, I think they might have a chance, but I would put my money somewhere else.
Yeah. So the last kind of, there's 3 countries that have 2 teams that qualified, and out of these 3 teams or 6 teams, there are 3 teams at least that have had some really good performances in the past. CrossFit Porti, who you mentioned, I'll let you talk about them in a second. And then the 2 French teams, CrossFit Caen and CrossFit Zarautz, have both produced good quality teams out of those affiliates. And in particular, the athletes on CrossFit Zarautz have a lot of experience. The women have a ton of experience and caliber. And those French teams, I think, will outperform their quarterfinals rank. I don't know if it'll be enough, but CrossFit Porti, Simen, you can't count these guys out.
No, they've been solid at the games, I think, for the last 3 years.
And it's the exact same for again.
Yeah, and I think they have been top 20 actually at the games for the last 3 years. So I'm not going to count them out. I think they will probably qualify. I think
my feeling about Porti this year is they're going to either get the last spot in or the first spot out. They're going to be 8 or 9. That's kind of, I don't know why, I just have this kind of feeling about it, that they're going to be one of those teams that's going to be in that last workout, and maybe even the points are going to be so close that they won't know. I wasn't sure. I know these guys. I wasn't sure that they were going to run it back this year with the same 4 people. They, for people who are more familiar with CrossFit in North America or team competitions in North America, they remind me a lot of CrossFit Omnia, who's had a similar level of consistent success over the past 3 seasons. They disbanded this year. I wasn't sure if Porti would, but when you talk about all these little nuances that Simen's been referencing, having similar skill sets, even we've mentioned in the past teams that have a relatively similar height, they move very similarly, and they're so comfortable with each other that all the kind of intangible elements of team competition, they have a plus in that column, where some of these maybe newer created or younger athlete teams would have a disadvantage relative to a team like this.
Yeah, and I also think when you have competed together for this long, you really know that, okay, I'm the weakest one in the team in handstand push-ups, and then you really have to work on that. Or after a season, you learn that you're the weakest runner in the team, and then you really have to work on that. And after a few years, these things are going to even out, and that's going to help your performance a lot.
Probably the most intriguing team on this list to me is Aorta. I do know the women better than the men again, and there's a lot. I mean, it's pretty cool how many of the teams in Europe have strong partnerships of women, but Susan Trepner and Anna Donahur, a lot of experience competing together and in different parts of Europe. I don't know. Do you know these guys at all, Lars and Henrik?
Not too much. I have seen Henrik at some functional fitness competitions, I think. I think he's a big guy who's good at lifting. Again, I think this is a team that has done well in open and quarterfinals in the previous years, and we kind of still have to see them perform at live competitions. So yeah, if I were to guess one team that's in the top 8 now that might fall outside, this might be maybe a team that could struggle at the semifinals.
Yeah, and I mean, a part of that just comes down to that they don't have the same success and experience. I mean, most of those teams that are currently in the top 8 spots, the 2 Norway teams, that top Denmark team, 2 Spanish, 2 Swedish teams, we know that most of those athletes have done it before. Whereas the question mark still remains for Aorta.
Yeah, and also the Porti team fighting to get in there has more experience together on the team, and that might be like the deal breaker.
And the last team that qualified, only one country with one representative, and it's the Netherlands. And I would bet that at least one or two of these people are watching the show or will watch it and have been waiting for this moment. These exact 4 athletes finished 11th at the European semifinal last year, which was missing the game by 1 spot. It was like 20 or 30 point gap from the last team that qualified. But when you have a team who was that close 1 year before and decides to run it back, they were listed as Nijmegen last year. This year they have Jimert as their affiliate. So that way maybe unfamiliar to some of you, but that's always a little bit of, like, I wouldn't discount this team. I think they would need a really good run at the semis, but when you have the same athletes that were so close to kind of achieving their goal last year, they qualified, and that's kind of good enough. This is a team that I would think their mentality is wipe the slate clean. We know that we can compete at the semifinal stage. We've done it before, and we just need to be really clean in execution, and we'll have a chance on Sunday. That's the mentality I would be bringing.
Yeah. And if that's the case, I think they could do well. And I agree. It feels like there's no reason to come back to the semifinals and do worse. You really have to aim to go higher than 11th place. So the next step is a qualifying spot.
And it's a bit of a crude study. I don't I do know a lot of these athletes. I don't know all of them, but when I kind of did the little pencil math, I counted 19 out of 30 teams that I believe have a chance. You've even mentioned a couple that are outside of that are maybe in the 11 that I wouldn't have given a chance to just off the bat, and kind of cited some reasons that are fair. The right slate of programming could see one of these 2 other Norway teams do really well. Some of these athletes our teams are comprised of athletes that we don't have that much information for, and so we might expect one thing, but maybe we get something else. That always happens. And so, either way you slice it, you want to make the games out of Europe this year, you have to A, be really good, and B, perform really well at the semis.
Yeah, you really have to be a good team. And I looked back at the games leaderboard from last year, and the top 8 teams from Europe were actually top 18 in the world. So if that's the level that we're bringing, you really have to be able to qualify from Europe. You should probably be top 20 in the world. Well,
it's a great stat to have there. I hadn't checked that out, but I have a huge passion for European CrossFit, and obviously they have a ton of good individuals. If you have not realized how good they've done on the team side, it's not just that they have 8 in the top 18. They've had multiple years with 1 or 2 teams on the podium. I think each of the last 3 years, at least 1, in some cases 2. That team Genas from France made it 1 year. A couple other teams that have been close, regularly having 4 or 5 of the top 10. The team competition in Europe is serious, and the spots are at a premium. If if you were going to maybe pick 1 or 2 things that's not on competition floor, that's like pertaining to either preparation before or during a competition, that you think sometimes makes a difference for these teams, what would you kind of point to?
I think, again, with the program that we have seen in semis and games, is having strengths and weaknesses that align, and especially identifying those weaknesses early in the season so that you're able to work on them. When we start out with teams in November, we have a meeting with all the teams, and then we talk through all the movements that we think might show up at semifinals or games, and then we actually make a list, and then we mark each athlete. You're probably going to be the weakest one in handstand push-ups. You're probably going to be the weakest one in wing muscle-ups. So in every movement that might show up, we have the name of 1 athlete, or maybe 2 if we're not sure. This is where you are the weakest, probably. And then they have about 6 or 7 months until the semis to try to change that.
I love it.
If you're like, for the CrossFit Oslo Kriger a wrist team, for Tobias, who is a great athlete and is also really, really good at endurance, because the other 3 athletes are even better than him, he has all of a sudden started to have to work on his running and his ergs. As an individual athlete, that would be not necessary for him, because he's already really good there. But on a team, if everybody's going to row, like the guys are going to row 60 calories and the girls are going to row 45, it's probably going to be the last of the rower. So now he has 7 months to work on his rowing. So I think that is like adapting the training or adjusting the training to the strengths and weaknesses of the team is really important.
Yeah, I love that insight. First of all, just being honest with athletes and being real. Like, they probably know those things anyway, but to be able to sit down and have that conversation and not be like, it's not like this is a bad thing. This is just how it is. And here's our team, and we have this much time to prepare.
Yeah, and actually it's a good thing, because once we acknowledge that, we can try to change it. I think the worst thing would be if you know you're the weakest and then you try to hide it from the team because you're kind of embarrassed about your ring muscle ups and stuff like that. I think then you're going to have a real problem at the semifinals if you show up and surprise everybody with not being able to do as many ring muscle ups as you thought.
I think it has the potential to create a really positive training environment also, where you have these 4 people here, and everyone knows that this athlete is working on this skill. And therefore, when they have a breakthrough or a success or a really good training session, it's also not in isolation, but there's a chance for people to celebrate with them and kind of motivate, encourage to keep going.
Yeah. And also, if there is one moment where you are the weakest, then you have 3 guys on the team who are better than you that could help you, give you tips, coach you, see something that you haven't thought about before. And again, once we acknowledge that, it's a lot easier for the best handstand walker on the team to help the worst handstand walker on the team.
That's awesome. PC, I know you have at least one question for Simen. Maybe there's some others that have trickled in, but I'm going to kind of turn it over to you here. You're muted, so you're still on mute.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to the Peak 360, we actually have a lot of questions regarding that. And, most of them revolve around how come it's Peak 360 and not Kreiger. And I think the answer to that is because it's an affiliate, and, it's based off the affiliate, but, Joachim and yourself and the Kreiger are providing the programming, especially having 2 athletes on that team. And I would say, to very established team athletes, because Matilda has team experience at the games, and obviously Lena does as well. So I think that's kind of answered the question on that, unless you have further details.
Yeah, that's true. If they were to compete for CrossFit Oslo, they would have to fly to Oslo to do the Open each week, and then the quarterfinals, or move here. And
I don't think Noah's doing that.
I totally understand why Noah wants to stay in Miami. So I also think the girls are completely fine by just staying in Miami.
Yeah. It's funny because
are you guys crazy? I mean, it doesn't look like they're having any fun down there.
None at all. It's funny because me and Brian are actually, each one of us wrote a letter to get their visas for Lena and Matilda, so that way they could be in Miami. So it's just kind of cool to be like, we, for some way we kind of played a part in that. So we're gonna. So if they win the games, it's because of us, Brian.
Yeah, it's about 50% you guys.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna take credit for that. So you're welcome, Noah and Tola. So you brought that up earlier. It's like you see a lot of these super teams, and I think I kind of know the answer to this, but kind of to the people who are listening and other people, why is this team different with being a super team that you have established stars? Why is this team? Why, in your mind? I know it's relatively early in the season. We won't know until the games, but everything we've seen so far through the Open and quarterfinals, this is the team to beat. Why is that?
I think once you have 4 athletes that are the level that the athletes on the peak team is, like their weak movement is still so good that they're going to be better than most athletes on other teams. Like Noah is so well-rounded and a good athlete that his weakest movement would be like he's still better than most athletes on other teams as well. So I think once you have that caliber of athletes, it doesn't really matter too much if you have like varied strengths and weaknesses. And also I think, again, when we started to work with a peak team, we still try to recognize it and look at like Tola's and Lena's running to try to get it to match Matilda and Noah's. And after 6 or 7 months of training with this focus on strengths and weaknesses, I think it's going to be a big challenge for other teams to beat them at the games.
It's funny because when you talk about weaknesses for Noah, I don't even know if it's really a weakness, but Noah is known as one of those athletes who just, sometimes he goes out too hot, which if you're on a team, that's actually a good thing because, you can either switch off. I mean, when I think of that, I think of someone like Tim Paulson, where you can throw him on the echo bike and just go. And that could be the difference between winning and losing. And I think that's a really good attribute for someone like Noah. Now he can probably go all out on some events, and not run the risk of finishing last or anything like that because he has teammates that can do that for him or that can pick up the slack.
Yeah, and I also think Noah has improved a little bit on his pacing skills.
Yes.
I think together with the team and with the coaches, he is going to do very well at the games with the pacing as well. Yeah. But some movements where he's able to just go all out. If he gets some burpees and has some handstand push-ups, we're just going to send him do a thing, and he's going to crush everybody.
That's crazy. And then again, like I said, not many people realize that Matilda was started off as a team athlete, but then now you have Lena and Tola, who are just probably two of the best. When you think about putting together a team, those are two athletes that you would probably start with making a team if they're available. So you combine them, and Noah's learning from some of the best.
Yeah, and then you have again with the caliber of athletes, one of Lena's weaker movements would maybe be running, but then again she's so good at running that she won a lot of running events with the navy blue. So even though running is her weakest movements, they're still better than most teams at the game.
It's crazy.
So yeah, if you're good enough, it doesn't really matter. But if you're one of those teams between 5 and 10, and you really want to place as high as possible, it could be a good strategy to try to win those events where you have your strength.
Yeah.
Simen, earlier another question had come in about there's some teams, I think primarily in North America, that we've heard of, but I think there are some around the world as well that had a little bit of an issue with maybe an athlete not doing the workout or one of the workouts at the gym that they're supposed to do. I haven't seen anything in Europe, but I did want to ask you, just as like a best practice, what have you guys kind of implemented in terms of keeping track of the rules year to year, because they regularly change, and also making sure that everything is in alignment for the online stages of the season so something like this doesn't happen?
Yeah, me and Joachim try to read the rule book every year. And that's the step one. The good thing this year was it was highlighted everything that changed. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty quick to read through it. I think I read most of it again just to remember everything from previous years. But then, of course, focusing on the changes. We had one team from Sweden last year who struggled with this rule about doing everything at the same gym. So after that happened, I think we got even more focused that we don't want to make any mistakes. So we actually have had alternates sitting on the train for 4 hours to come to Oslo and do 1 rep, and then take the train back, just to make sure that we follow the rules and don't make any mistakes. And then with the online competition like the quarterfinals, it's just making sure that we read through the standards 2 or 3 times, that we set up everything in advance with camera angles, and just try to not make any mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, I know that this week, the individual quarterfinals workouts are going to come out at noon Pacific. So it'll be, middle of the night or just getting ready for bed for you guys over there. Yeah. But, in North America, middle of the day on a Wednesday, there's athletes that could just start doing the workouts if they want to. And then they have all the way until Monday. But I would always caution people to don't rush to do that first workout. Read it again, have your friend read it, have the coach read it, because even if you're planning to redo the workouts, you don't want to have to redo the workouts. Yeah.
And also I think it's very valuable to see the flow and see other teams do the movement or the workout first. So we had all 8 teams at CrossFit Oslo competing back to back. We had set schedule, so we had 2 or 3 teams going every 30 minutes. And the teams who went last, of course, were there to watch and cheer on the first teams and learning from like some of the minor mistakes or tweaks or changes that we can make. And then from day to day, we changed who had to go first so that nobody get like a special benefit from that, but everybody was able to learn something to be more efficient.
I was going to ask how you determine the order, because my first instinct would be like, PSL, you guys are really good. You're probably going to make it no matter what. You're going first every time so everyone can learn from you.
Yeah, we did that for some of the days with the PSL and the RIS team. Once after, especially after the first window where we were pretty confident that they were going to qualify, we had them do the workouts, third and fourth workout early so that the other teams could watch it. And then maybe that helped some of the team that were just inside the qualifying spot to do a little bit better.
There's a reoccurring theme this year that has been ingrained into my mind about CrossFit. It's that the margins are small, and if you can find a little edge here or there, whatever it is, take advantage of it.
Definitely. We especially for quarterfinals this year, I think there was a lot of like transitions with a 50 handstand push-up split anyhow, just making sure that you can kick up onto a cartwheel and actually hit the tape line. We had some really fast transitions on those workouts.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, is like who handles the logistics for that? I mean, and especially for someone like was it Ivan? He actually runs Oslo, correct? He actually runs Oslo, doesn't he?
Yeah, so Ivan is of course there, and he has a lot of experience on the team, so he helps out. His girlfriend Ingrid is competing on the PSL team, so he's a little bit extra focused on that team. And then me and Joachim is there. We had 3 or 4 other Kriger coaches as well, and then Kristin, of course. So we had a pretty solid team of judges and coaches and a lot of people in place.
That's probably the last question I have for you is about the judges, because there's been a lot of conversation about this, of camps bringing in judges or not, or whatever. And then there's even this kind of statement out there from CrossFit that you don't really need a judge, just do your video and we'll review it. What's your approach?
Well, we want to have a judge because we feel like if you get a lot of no reps and then the CrossFit review team has to give you the no reps, you're going to get more punished than you would if you just got a no rep during the workout and then did another rep. But we do prefer to have judges who are not coaching, so that the coach for the team can actually coach and then the judge can judge.
I love that.
So for the teams that I'm responsible for, I did judge some of them, but I definitely prefer to be 100% coach and not have to count the reps.
I lied. I do have one more question for you. Because we're talking about the logistics of quarterfinals and how you guys have managed that. But the next stage of the season is semifinals. You guys have 4 teams from Norway alone and a couple others that you're affiliated with that are traveling there.
Individuals.
And yeah, the quarterfinals are about to wrap up for teams, and once they're approved today and they get their invites, you can then start making plans in terms of logistics for semifinals. You guys could also have individuals that potentially make it, and the timeline for that is a lot tighter. How are you guys approaching the logistics of getting all of your athletes, coaches, and necessary personnel to semis this year?
We have an idea of who might qualify for individuals. So we feel pretty confident that we're going to have 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 athletes qualify. And then we have coaches that are responsible for teams, and then we have coaches that are responsible for individuals. And then me and Joachim will try to be in the warm-up area and control everything and be available for all teams and all athletes in the Kreiger community. I'm not sure about Kristin, but I hope she's going to be there as well. So we're just trying. We're hoping that we get enough coach passes.
Sometimes that you find out that information a little bit late.
Yeah, true.
Make plans. What about in terms of like getting there? How early will you guys go down there? How early do you recommend your athletes to arrive prior to a semifinal?
we try to have everybody travel on Wednesday, which is a rest day. And then we will do a workout on Thursday just to get the body moving and then ready for competition on Friday. So with this short travel to Lyon, we prefer to do that. Of course, if the flight is longer, like to the States, we come a couple of weeks in advance.
Yeah, big difference traveling across the ocean compared to, is it the time zone the same, or is it 1 hour different?
To Lyon is the same.
Same. Oh, so yeah, it's like flying from Florida to New York. That's what you guys in the States can think about.
Yeah,
you can do that 1 day acclimation, no problem. That's pretty nice. And for most countries in Europe, it's not a big flight. Like Lyon is pretty central.
Yeah, it is. So and it's easy to get there. So that's gonna be good. We really do like to compete in Europe and not having to do this time zone shift, because we see that it's quite challenging for some of the athletes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And just you thinking about that, I mean, obviously you have an athlete there who will have to go a couple time zones away for semifinals. Well, we hope in Sahar. And I want to say, like, I was fortunate last year to have a coach's pass and to see, the coaches and how you guys were able to, juggle that. And it was just amazing watching you, Joachim, just how you handle your individuals and going to team. It's like these guys are working, they're busting their butts back there. It seemed like you guys are constantly coaching and then sprinting to go, because you had a team or an individual running around. It was, to see that, and also to be welcomed. You guys were very welcoming for me to be there. It was pretty neat. And it's undervalued how important and how much work you guys do behind the scenes. And I was very lucky to kind of witness that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun as well. I think we wouldn't do this if we didn't really, really like it. And I would probably be at semifinals helping the athletes even if I didn't get paid to do it. But yeah, I do have a vacation plan for the 20th of May.
That's the day. That's the day after the European semifinals ends. I have a flight planned that day also. It's back to the States to get ready for second week, but you certainly will have earned a vacation by then.
I'll take a couple of days vacation. So you're coming to Europe semifinals?
I'll be in Athens Throwdown the week before. Then I'll go to French Throwdown, and then I'll go to the West Coast and the East Coast. So that'll be a pretty good month for me in terms of competition.
Yeah, and I won't be going to Europe. It looks like I'm going to be going to Korea.
Oh, you are?
It looks like it.
Okay, perfect. So you have long as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have. I think we'll have someone, at least one person from B.Friendly at 5 of the 7 semifinals this year, which is pretty cool.
That's good.
Yeah. That's it for me, Simen. I think that was great. I mean, like I said in the start, it can be so difficult to really get a good picture of not just where these teams are coming from, but who the members of the teams are. So appreciate you taking the time to kind of break that down. And then with a more, personalized view on Kriger, who clearly has their imprint on this sport, especially in the team side of things. Thank you for giving us kind of an insight into what the operations and the athletes process is like over there.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I forgot to say it at the start. Simen is one of the few people in CrossFit I've actually played disc golf with. And you can see him featured in a reel back in whenever I was up there in Norway. That was one of the best days, dude.
That was a nice day. And I'm going to practice a lot this year to try to give you some competition at the games. After the game, we'll do another round.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some great courses down there in Texas. We can make that happen.
Perfect.
All right, Simen. Have a good night. Thank you for taking the time, man. We'll see you in France.
Thank you. See you in France.
Simen Aaslund with the Kriger training. Great insights there. I really appreciate him taking the time. Hopefully some value there for fans, maybe other teams or coaches that are just trying to learn from someone who, has a pulse on this space and has, some systems in place that have been working really well for them. And also it's kind of cool. I didn't know that if you're an athlete and you think that you have the interest in competing on the team side of things, you can apply to be a part of Kriger training or on one of their teams. And it seems like the transparency is probably the word I would use that they have at that with that training program and community, as he calls it, is something that I would think is very welcoming, where, you don't have to feel bad about the feedback they're giving you. They're giving you the feedback that you've asked for. And it's going to tell you kind of who you are, where you're at, where you want to go, and what you need to do to get there. And from the time that I've spent with them in Norway, I know that they have some processes in place that it's not random. It's Sherwood and Bosman say varied, not random. And I would say that translates very well to what Kriger is doing there, is that there's a great variety of training that's going on, and you might walk in the gym and look around and be a little bit like, wow, there's a lot of good athletes here, but I can't tell what they're all doing. But I guarantee you that Simen and Joachim know exactly what all of them are doing, and they make it their job to know that. Yeah.
And then he brought it up a couple times. It's like, it's just not those two, but it seems like Kristen Holta is being a lot more involved as well. Obviously, it was her and Joachim. Joachim was her coach when she left Invictus to go back to Norway. But it looked like they've built something there. They've built something that's just, that I can't really, I guess the only thing I can kind of maybe attribute it to is something similar to what Mayhem had built here in the States, but their own version of it. And and then I think, them being, like you used the word transparent, but I think them being so transparent and also, being so welcoming to all these other countries within Europe, and not just saying, hey, we're just going to stick with Norwegians. They're like, no, we want.
It's almost funny because you think about other parts of the world where there's countries that are very close together and have these histories, and I think it would be surprising if a contingency of Brazilian CrossFit teams started welcoming in Argentinian ones. I don't think that's likely to happen. No. But you have Sweden representation of Kreiger. You have Danish representative of Kreiger. These are the closest countries to them. And they have a working relationship with athletes and gyms from those countries as well. So it speaks, I think, really highly of the character and the quality of what's going on with the Kreiger training.
Yeah, and it's here in the U.S. now.
And it's here in the U.S. And of course, we do see the Mayhem team sprinkled across, like you said. And the other, one that really, I think, was disrupted by political reasons, but the Kalashnikov team's kind of DNA and what they had become in Russia, and maybe they will become again, had that very similar feel. You heard Simen say, if you're a serious competitor in Norway, a lot of them are moving to Oslo to be close to CrossFit Oslo. And I think that was happening in Russia too. And, it certainly could happen in some other parts of the world, but these are some of the early camps, and especially on the team side, that are having that kind of footprint.
Yeah. And Matilda is a perfect example of that. She ran an affiliate up in Trondheim, which isn't very close to Oslo. And, for her to basically put her business aside to follow through as an athlete, that says a lot about what's going on in Oslo. And we're seeing that as well, because obviously the Trondheim is now adopted the Oslo way. They're training down there, they're getting as much time as they can down there, because obviously, training, whether it be in Sweden, Denmark, and wherever, it's great, but you still want to get eyes on from your coaches. And that's definitely what you're going to get when you go to Oslo. Hell, Tola, you missed Tola by
I know
week, but we could say that was like Tola stopped by and spent a couple days there. And I think it was like kind of a process. Tola's he's almost like Fikowski, where everything he does is very deliberate. It's very calculated. And that was a move by Tola to kind of go up there and see how things were, kind of see how they train, get to know the coaches. And, Tola just doesn't join a team just because of the athletes. It's about everything that encompasses. Everything has to be in the right, it has to fit him. And this is not the athletes on the team. Everything has to fit him. And that's why he's been so successful. And that's what makes him one of the best team athletes of all time. So,
absolutely. So that's kind of a look at the European teams. We will have I think we need to bring back the Invitational. Wow, man, I'm jealous that you were in Berlin watching it in 2013. Yeah, those were super fun. I've gone back and watched many of those many times over. They're a great watch if you have an hour or two on a weekend or whatever, because you can watch them in an hour or two. That's how long the competitions were.
Yeah, it's funny because Dave talks about the Invitation. I think Dave Castro loved it, probably an Invitational more than he loved the games, because he talks so highly about the Invitational, how much fun it was. And I think it's because it was simple. He knew it was an exhibition. No money was on the line. Athletes who wanted to compete there, they wanted to be there. and they created teams, and he speaks so highly of it, and he still does. But I think what it comes down to is like it was such a it wasn't a cash cow for them. Not saying that it had to be, but it was a financial burden for them. And who knows?
Well, I mean,
Maybe
we know the spending was different. The
Mhm.
accountability on financial side was different in that era of CrossFit. He said, when he talks about it now, he says, we're not going to go backwards. If we're going to do something like that, we're going to go forwards. And I think that I would say that's a little bit cop out. Like you could go forwards to a new version of the invitational and call it the same thing and have the same
Mhm.
concept, and people would be very welcoming of that. And people who, who know what it is, like Jake, and people who had never got a chance to experience that, I think would embrace that really well. So we'll see. He kind of every time he brings it up, he has this little look in his eye of like he has a plan or he has an idea. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some version of that, whether it's called that or called something differently at some point. But it also might come down to resource, and maybe right now is not the time for them to be investing in something new like that. But a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, and we know that from the past that Dave is not impatient. If he has an idea but it's not, the timing's not right, he won't force it. He'll wait until the timing is right. So that's kind of what I think about that.
Yeah. So, well, I gotta get back to work. I'm sure you have some work to do, but we're back on tomorrow. We have Barkley joining us. So
Barkley Dale, he's been more
B.Friendly
active on
stats.
Instagram the past week, putting out some really crazy stats. If you're not giving him a follow and you like CrossFit stuff, he is the man responsible for the B.Friendly fitness database. And he and I have been working on some stuff for a couple of years now. And we finally are ready to, you've seen it if you've been following our coverage of off-season competitions, but you may not know exactly what it is. And we're finally going to reveal it tomorrow in a kind of 2 different formats. It's a strength of field rating system that's styled after the Madden rating system, 0 to 99. And we're going to take a look at the current top athletes in the world and also a 10-year historical study. I think it's 10 years or 8-year historical study of 19 of the best athletes in CrossFit over that time period to give you guys kind of 2 different looks at where the value in something like this is. And it's just going to be a fun conversation, I think.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun to kind of just sit
Have
there.
you read that article yet?
I have.
It's a long one.
I had to read it a couple times. Well, not certain parts a couple times to just kind of like soak it in, and because my mind doesn't work so much in numbers. It's more of like statements. But it'll be interesting to hear you 2 guys nerd out about it tomorrow. Yeah. So that article will be up tomorrow. We'll have Barkley on, and then Wednesday hopefully we get Bella on for our weekend, catching up with friends. So there's some cool stuff going on, and hopefully by the time, if we do the same time, I think the workout shall be released by then. So it could probably turn into a preview show of the individual quarterfinals. So so that's what's on the docket this week. Shout out to HGR Carl. HGR CBD, always supporting us. Use code FRIEND20 for 20% off all your CBD needs. I actually used it yesterday because we had to do land navigation, and a lot more hiking than I normally used to. No, Jeffrey, I have not seen anything yet, but I was actually going to send an email to CrossFit to actually check on that. So if I hear anything, we'll let you know. But yeah, so that's what we got on tap this week. Yeah, that's all I have.
Pull that picture up again
of Jeffrey. I know he changed his picture. Look at that.
Love that.
Yeah, he's Texas, man.
Dude.
That's Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was skimming through the comments. It sounds like he's maybe moving to even a more rural location. So,
oh, geez,
perfect.
Yeah, but hey, thanks for all our friends for joining us. Obviously, a special shout out to Simen, for joining us. That it's always great talking to him. He's, not many people may know who he is, but they do need to know who he is because he's one of those fast, up and coming coaches, really well known and respected in Europe. So always cool to get him on. He actually has, I believe, like a background in journalism. So it won't be the last time you see him. So it's always cool to have him on and kind of introduce everyone to him. So, but shout out to him, everyone in the comments. Thanks for joining us. And as always,